Hand over the bags, my mom says you owe us. That was how a 16-year-old kid greeted me on my own driveway, arms folded, chin up, blocking the trunk like he'd been born with a deed in his pocket. I set the groceries down real slow, looked at him and thought, well, now, this is either the dumbest thing I've seen all month or the opening scene of something even dumber. His name was Cody Whitmore, and he had that jittery kind of confidence some boys get when they've spent too long standing in the shadow of somebody louder than them. He pointed at my grocery bags like they were already his, said his mother told him to come collect what I owed the HOA. I asked him to walk me through that logic, and you could see the gears grinding because there wasn't any logic, just borrowed attitude. Then he hit me with, or what you gonna call the cops? I looked at him for about 3 seconds, maybe 4. No, I said I won't. That answer landed harder than a threat would have. You could see it in his face. He was ready for anger, ready for noise, ready for some big dramatic scene he could take back across the street like a trophy. What he wasn't ready for was calm. People like Cody and people like his mother, they build their whole little kingdom around the belief that if they push hard enough, everybody eventually flinches. I picked up my groceries and went inside. His mother hit my porch. 11 minutes later, phone already in her hand, voice already up in the air before I even opened the door. Bettina Whitmore, H. A president of Meadowlark Estates, 6 years running the kind of woman who wore authority like jewelry and expected everybody to admire the shine. She told me she was calling the police, told me I was going to regret embarrassing her son, told me I clearly didn't understand who she was in this neighborhood. I picked up the last bag from beside the door, looked her dead in the eye and said, "Ma'am, make the call." She did. And that right there was the last mistake Bettina Whitmore ever made in Meadowlark Estates. But to really enjoy how badly that blew up in her face, you need the whole road that led there, because none of this started with groceries. It started 14 months earlier when I moved into Meadowlark Estates just outside Ridgecroft, Tennessee, thinking I was buying peace and quiet. I was 8 months into my new role as police chief, 22 years into law enforcement total, and I was tired in a way that sits in your bones. Patrol detective lieutenant, then chief. I'd spent enough years hearing sirens, fluorescent lights, bad news, and grown adults lying to my face that I wanted a yard of deck and a little bit of stillness. So I bought a 3-bedroom place on Briarwood Court. Nothing fancy but solid. Needed some work on the deck, had a dogwood tree out front that had been cut back too hard by the previous owner and came with an HOA, I figured would be annoying in the same way a mosquito is annoying. A little buzzing, maybe a bite, then you move on. That was my first mistake. I kept my job to myself on purpose. After enough years wearing a badge, you learn people don't act normal once they know. Some want favors, some get stiff, some start performing innocence like you're about to arrest them for breathing weird. I introduced myself as a city employee, smiled, waved, unloaded boxes, kept it simple. Across the street lived Bettina Whitmore, 53, fit, sharp as a nail, always dressed like she might be on her way to either a board meeting or a minor execution. She had personally authored half the nonsense rules in that neighborhood, including landscaping color guidelines, and yes, that was a real thing. There was a laminated chart. Her son Cody roamed the cul-de-sac in an HOA-approved golf cart like a tiny deputy of bad judgment. Together they gave off the energy of people who had confused routine control with actual power. 3 weeks after I moved in, I got my first violation notice. Failure to maintain approved exterior paint integrity on my mailbox post. The post was white. The approved color was antique linen. You and I both know that is the same color wearing a fake mustache. The fine was $40. I paid it. Not because she was right and not because I was scared. I paid it because I was exhausted, had a budget meeting that week, and had more urgent problems in my life than a mailbox having an identity crisis. I told myself to pick my battles. What I didn't understand yet was that Bettina read that payment like a green light. To her, it meant she had found the perfect neighbor. Polite, busy, easy to push. The kind who would sigh, write a check, and stay out of the way. She was wrong. She was just early. By September, the notices started coming like clockwork. Gutters needed cleaning even when I'd just cleaned them. Recycling bins were supposedly too close to the property line. Decorative stones around the dogwood tree which came with the house were suddenly an unauthorized hardscape violation. Every week it was something. Same tone, same smug little language, same sense that somebody was trying to teach me my place. So I started reading. All 47 pages of the HOA bylaws, CC and RS amendments, little buried clauses, every bit of it. I read them the way I used to read criminal code, slow and careful, pencil in hand, because after a while the pattern got obvious. Bettina wasn't enforcing rules. She was using rules. Big difference. One is governance. The other is theater with paperwork. Then Cody showed up at my door one Friday leaning on the frame like he owned the place, telling me his mom said my response letter had a lot of mistakes in it. And also, by the way, she was going to report some supposed stormwater issue at my driveway expansion joint. He said it like that phrase alone was supposed to scare me. Thing is, years earlier I'd worked a case with County Public Works and had learned more about drainage and runoff than Bettina could bluff her way through in a lifetime. So I told him to have his mother send me the exact code citation in writing. He blinked like I'd answered in a language he didn't speak. That was when I knew for sure this wasn't about compliance. This was about obedience. Then came the whisper campaign. A neighbor would mention, kind of awkward, that Bettina had brought me up at a coffee gathering. Another neighbor said she'd hinted I wasn't cooperating with community standards. Little comments, little seeds, just enough to make folks nervous before they got to know me. I've seen that move before. People trying to isolate somebody before making the next play. Strip away support, make the target feel alone, then close in. Only problem for Bettina was, I know how that game works. So instead of reacting, I got patient. I started taking notes. Dates, notices, wording bylaw sections, whether the claim had any basis at all. And while I was doing that, I got to know the people around me. Really know them. I helped Marcus Donovan refinish my deck. I learned the Kowalczyks had been afraid to fix a pipe because Bettina had convinced them normal exterior work would trigger some endless review mess. I learned an older widow named Millicent had gotten hassled over wind chimes. I learned Everett Sims, my elderly next-door neighbor, had spent years keeping his head down because Bettina liked making examples out of people. That part bothered me worse than what she was doing to me. By November, she realized I wasn't getting isolated. I was settling in. People waved stop to talk, brought coffee, shared stories. So she changed tactics. At the HOA meeting that month, she pushed through a new rule saying any resident with 3 violations could be subjected to a mandatory property audit by the board's designated representative. Guess who the designated representative was? After the meeting, I quietly asked the management company rep when the rule could legally take effect. He told me there had to be a public comment period first. Earliest date, January 15th. I wrote that down. Then I called my attorney. Her name was Cecily Farr, and she had that bright, calm energy of somebody who genuinely enjoys finding the loose nail in a rotten floorboard. She went through the HOA documents over one weekend and came back with 3 things that changed everything. First, Bettina's new audit rule had no appeal process, which made it shaky from the jump. Second, the HOA had been issuing fines under a schedule that was never properly approved by the residents, which meant years of fines might not hold up at all. And third, Bettina had been paying a company registered in her own name out of HOA funds for administrative services with no real disclosure that mattered. That one sat between us for a second. Because there it was underneath all the mailbox nonsense and hedge nonsense and bin placement nonsense. The real story. Control had a money trail. I remember sitting in my kitchen with cold coffee in my hand, winter light coming through the window, hearing Cecily say it plain. Bettina wasn't just a bully. She had built herself a little machine, and she'd gotten comfortable enough to think nobody would ever look under the hood. So I went looking harder. I pulled the original filed HOA documents from the county recorder's office, not the cleaned-up version the board handed around, the real one, the recorded one. Buried deep in the original language was a clause saying that if the HOA brought enforcement without actual documented evidence of a violation, the homeowner could recover costs and damages. That clause had probably been sitting there for 20 years waiting for one tired person with enough patience to actually read it. And I had 11 violation notices, every one of them weak wrong or flat out invented. So we built the case. Cecily sent certified letters to the management company and the board members. I started gathering signatures from residents for a special membership meeting. Once people realized somebody was finally willing to stand up and also had receipts, their fear started turning into anger. Quiet anger, but real. I got more than enough signatures. Everett backed me. The Donovans backed me. Folks from the next street over backed me. Turns out bad leadership looks a lot less invincible once somebody shines a flashlight on it. Then Bettina panicked. She tried leaning on the management company. Tried leaning on the other board members, hired a private inspector to sniff around my property line, Problem there was I already had a county certificate of compliance for the whole property. Official, clean, cheap to get too. Best $60 I spent that year. The day before her precious audit, she hand-delivered me a letter accusing me of harassing the association and demanding I withdraw the petition. By 5 that evening, she said, or she'd contact law enforcement. I laughed when I read it, not because it was funny exactly, more because some people get so deep into their own fantasy that reality starts sounding rude to them. I photographed the letter, sent it to Cecily, took a walk, and called one more person. A local reporter I trusted, Joellen Paskey from the Ridgecroft Courier. I told her if she wanted to see how small-town power really behaves when it starts slipping, she might want to be on Briarwood Court the next morning. Then I slept just fine. January 15th came gray and cold. Cecily was in my living room with coffee. My documents were spread out on the kitchen table. The petition was filed, the letters had landed, the board was rattled, and the street felt like it was holding its breath. At 8:43, I heard Cody's golf cart first. Then Bettina came up my driveway on foot clipboard in hand, measuring tape on her belt, wearing that embroidered HOA fleece like she was stepping into battle. She rang the bell. I opened the door. She told me the board was there to conduct the mandatory compliance audit, and if I obstructed it in any way, she would call the police. I said, "You're welcome to make that call." She dialed right there in front of me. Now here's the part I still enjoy more than I probably should. The call went through county dispatch, and then through my department. And the responding sergeant was Antoinette Webb, a 20-year veteran who had worked with me for years and already knew there might be a nonsense call coming from my address that morning. So when Bettina put on her best offended citizen voice and reported a combative homeowner interfering with an official inspection, Sergeant Webb was already on her way. When the cruiser pulled up, Bettina straightened like help had finally arrived for the forces of righteousness. Webb got out calm as Sunday walked up the driveway and asked for names. Bettina gave hers first, of course. Then Webb looked at me. "Darnell Okafor," I said. Webb gave the tiniest nod, just enough to acknowledge me without blowing the whole thing too early. Cecily stepped into the doorway with the folder. I explained nice and even that the audit rule had been challenged, the fine structure had legal problems, and there were serious questions about undisclosed payments tied to Bettina's own company. Then, because there was no point hiding it anymore, I said the one thing Bettina had never once thought to ask in all the months she'd been coming after me. "I'm the police chief of Ridgecroft." You ever watch somebody's face realize it has been having the wrong conversation for a very long time? It's something. The street went dead quiet. Cody froze on the golf cart. Bettina's clipboard dipped. Then Joellen, right on time, came walking up with her notepad and asked if Bettina wanted to comment on the special meeting petition and the payments made to Whitmore Property Management Solutions. That was it. That was the sound the whole machine made when it finally broke. Bettina said nothing. Not to me, not to the sergeant, not to the reporter. She turned around and walked back across the cul-de-sac in that ridiculous fleece, and Cody backed the golf cart out like he was trying to disappear without technically reversing fast enough to count as fleeing. Everett Sims was on his porch in a robe holding a coffee mug up like a little salute. I lifted mine back. The special membership meeting happened in February, and the room was packed. Real packed. More than 100 households represented. Once people smelled blood in the water, they showed up. Bettina didn't. The vote to remove her was a landslide. The management company bailed. The board got rebuilt. Residents filed claims over bogus fines, and the new board honored them. Most of the money Bettina had funneled through her side company got paid back into the HOA fund through a civil settlement. Nothing dramatic in the Hollywood sense. No handcuffs, no speeches, no thunderclap. Just documents, witnesses, pressure, truth. And a woman who had spent too many years thinking nobody else was willing to read the fine print. And honestly, that's the lesson I carried out of all of it. Most abuse of power doesn't start with some giant crime. It starts small, petty, almost laughable. A mailbox color a hedge, wind chimes a kid demanding grocery bags because his mother told him the rules were whatever she said they were. That's how it gets in. That's how people get trained to surrender little pieces of themselves until one day they don't feel at home in their own home. What saved that neighborhood wasn't me being chief. That reveal made for a satisfying morning, sure. But it wasn't the real weapon. The real weapon was patience. Records. Asking the next question. Refusing to panic. And maybe that's the bitter little truth about people like Bettina. They don't usually fall because somebody shouts louder. They fall because somebody quieter finally starts paying attention. By spring, the dogwood in my yard bloomed thick and white. Everett came over to look at it, hands in his pockets, smiling in that soft way older men do when they've seen something finally come right. "That's a good tree," he said. "Yeah," I told him it is. And it felt good standing there in a yard that was mine, in a neighborhood that had finally remembered it belonged to the people living in it, not the loudest person with a clipboard.
So now I want to ask you something. When somebody abuses a little bit of power, is it smarter to shut it down the first time or wait, document everything, and let them build the case against themselves? And have you ever dealt with a person like that? Somebody who thought rules were just a weapon for everybody else? Tell me where you land and tell me what happened.